Hi and welcome to our first Coffee and Chat, where today we are joined by Trish Kerin, Director at the Institution of Chemical Engineers Safety Centre, and now the newly appointed Chair for the WorkSafe Victoria Major Hazards Advisory Committee. First of all, Trish, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today and congratulations on the appointment.
Thanks, Karen.
So you are overseas at the moment. What's the purpose of your visit to Rotterdam?
So I'm over here for the World Hydrogen Summit, which is going on this week in Rotterdam. And running alongside that is the Centre for Hydrogen Safety's conference. The Centre for Hydrogen Safety is a body largely led out of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers in the US. And they invited me to deliver a keynote at their conference this week.
Fantastic. So we do have a number of questions here. What inspired you to take on the role as the chair for the Major Hazards Advisory Committee?
So years ago, I actually sat on the Major Hazards Advisory Committee, originally PACEA, the Plastics and Chemicals Industries Association, as it was known then, now Chemistry Australia. I was their representative for almost 7 years to MHAC. So I've had a long exposure to what it does, how it works, why it exists. And I always found my time really interesting interacting with both the community groups, but also importantly, the employee representatives as well. And it was always fascinating to understand what was going on from the WorkSafe perspective, what their priorities were, but also hearing firsthand from the employee representatives and from the community on what their priorities were at that point in time, and then trying to figure out how we could work together to deliver that safety. So when I saw the opportunity to come up as the independent chair, it almost felt like the nice closing of a circle, so to speak, that I get to go back onto the committee because I had to step off it when I left working in industry. I get to go back to it and I get to try and shape it and lead it a little bit now as well.
A bit like a return home sort of scenario, I guess. Yeah. So what do you see as the most critical challenges and opportunities for the major hazard sector in the coming years?
So we're facing at the moment an absolute revolution in how we manage energy and deal with that. And so I think the new energies are going to be critically important as we go forward. Hydrogen, for example, I'm here talking about hydrogen all this week. Hydrogen is not a new product, obviously. It's been around forever. And we've been using it forever in a range of different applications. But we're now starting to see it used in different places, different applications, and different scale. And so managing the energy transition safely, I think, is going to be absolutely critical, whether it is we're talking about hydrogen or ammonia, any of the other carriers for that fuel, or indeed, solar, wind, etc. There's large energies to be managed here, and we need to get it right so that we don't harm the workforce and the community as well. So I think there's a great opportunity to embrace the energy transition and get it right. Let's get process safety in with inherently safer design at the start and not continually try to catch up.
And what do you hope to achieve? I guess you've somewhat answered some of that, but what do you hope to achieve during your tenure as chair? And how will you measure the committee's success in meeting its goals?
I think one of the key areas here is making sure that there's really high quality engagement from all the players. Now, if the committee itself is not functioning very well or it's not being interesting and engaging for its members, then they're not going to be attending or they're not going to be participating in full. So I think for me, it's getting everybody in the room participating at the maximum so that we get all the fantastic ideas on the table and can talk about them. And then potentially, providing that feedback, that advice back to the regulator so that WorkSafe Victoria can take steps in certain directions if that's what the stakeholders are telling them is needed. So it's really around creating that an environment where people feel free to be able to put their contribution forward. And I think the way I'll measure that is, again, by people's interaction and activity. Participation in the meeting is a key element to show how engaged people are in that space.
What is your most influential process safety moment on the topic of safety?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. For me, it was actually Longford, and understanding also the history of MHAC and where it came from, and it essentially was born out of the Longford Royal Commission, is quite interesting, I think. But at the time, I was working at Altona Refinery and I was managing the tank farm offsite areas. And I was in the control room in the planner's office when we got the phone call from Longford. There was actually a phone call from Long Island Point to tell us that the pipeline was being shut down because Longford had had an explosion. And I clearly remember, that day, the 25th of September, 1998, crystal clear in my memory. I can describe precisely where I was standing in the office when that call came through. And one of the reasons for that is we then turned on the radio because, back in those days, it was turning on the radio. And we turned on the radio and heard the news reports at that point. And I remember the announcer saying that there were 2 people missing. And at that point in time, we all just looked at each other in that room. And every one of us knew that John and Peter, tragically, were not missing. They would not have survived what occurred. And that moment hit home to me in a massive way. And it was at that moment that I thought, I need to try and figure out what I can do to make sure this doesn't happen again and doesn't happen to anybody else. Because I never wanted anybody to go through certainly what John and Peter's family and their co-workers and they went through in that particular instance. And, over the years, I've done a lot of work with Jim Ward, who was on MHAC for a while as well. And so I've now had the chance to meet and work with a lot of people that were directly impacted by that incident. And it's only cemented it in my mind as to that's the reason why I work in process safety. That's what drives me.
What or who is inspiring you at present in this field?
That's a little bit quirky for me right now. So I recently had a moment to think in amongst all of my travels and came up with a concept that I'm calling the platypus philosophy. So I am very much being focused at the moment on thinking about the platypus. And in fact, everywhere I go, I have a platypus with me, and I have my little platypus with me right now. And
That's
the platypus
from Hillsville Sanctuary, isn't it?
Isn't it a gorgeous little thing? The platypus is a fantastic metaphor for talking about weak signals, those weak things that we miss. It might have been the alarm that went off, but then it stopped and we're not quite sure what it was telling us, and we didn't bother focusing on it because it just went away. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there's not a problem there. But what if there is a problem? And the platypus actually is a perfect metaphor for explaining that concept and explaining how then to seek out and understand what these weak signals are so we don't have the incident happening. So that's certainly occupying a lot of my thought space at the moment. My little platypus, as I said, he travels everywhere with me. He is male because the males do have a toxic spur, and that's important in the whole metaphor. So if people are interested, reach out and I can talk to you about the platypus philosophy.
There you go. That's quite interesting. I didn't learn something new about platypuses there as well. This afternoon. What books then are on your nightstand? I assume that would be one of them.
Yes, so the platypus philosophy book is there. I obviously have that with me as well all the time. But I don't tend to read a lot of nonfiction. I occasionally do, but it's quite rare. And I also don't tend to read one book at a time. So right now, in fact, on the flight yesterday, I finished off Simplicity from Complexity by Howard Thomas, which is a great book to understand how to reframe some of your thinking to be more, to simplify what's going on. Not to be simplistic, but to actually simplify it in an elegant way. I'm also reading Under Pressure by Gareth Locke, which is about human factors in scuba diving, and there's some wonderful stories in there. I'm really quite enjoying that. And also currently referencing and revisiting a couple of times Fully Connected by Mel Kettle. It's a leadership book. And Dr. Kirsten Ferguson's latest book, Head and Heart. So they're the sort of things that I'm focusing on at the moment. A lot of leadership type texts in there, but also, human factors, some of that safety thread. I am a safety geek through and through.
Fair enough. That's nothing wrong with that. It was great to get to know you a little more there, Trish, and we certainly look forward to you joining the WorkSafe Major Hazards Advisory Committee in the very near future. So thank you very much for your time today, and best of luck with all the travels and the keynote speeches.
Thanks, Perrin. Stay safe.